What if the aches, fatigue, and flare-ups you feel are fueled by what you eat and just as easily quieted by your plate? Today, we move beyond the usual advice and uncover overlooked truths about what calms inflammation, what stokes it, and how you can start eating food for healing and prevention. Dr. Freda Wiley is back on WellWaveNOW, a pharmacist, raw food educator, and expert in using food as medicine. She brings years of experience helping people rethink what they put on their plates to support healing, improve performance, and live vibrantly. In this episode, Dr. Wiley breaks down not only the usual suspects, refined oils, added sugars, processed meats, but also clears up surprising misconceptions, like why some healthy berries can backfire and why personalization is key. Stay with us. You will leave this episode with easy swaps, nuanced meal and snack ideas, and clarity on what to avoid and why. Welcome to WellWaveNOW, your portal for actionable wellness insights. We, Breck Rice, Dr. Bob Levine, and I, Tim Daniels, are your wellness catalysts committed to elevating your health, enhancing your functionality, and optimizing your performance at every life stage. WellWaveNOW, where timeless wisdom lights your wellness path.
Well, welcome back, Dr. Freda. It's great to have you again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. Yeah, we have so much to cover today, and we kind of want to do more of a overall discussion with the group here on basically let's jump into inflammation, because not always is it bad. So we want to cover that as well, and exactly what is inflammation. So more of a group discussion rather than just firing questions off at you. Before we do that, let's remind all of our listeners to please join the WellWaveNOW Facebook group. We'll leave a link in the chat for you. Wonderful resources there, and this episode will be replayed there as well for everyone is on the Facebook group. But we'll leave that link in the show notes for those listening to the podcast. It's at facebook.com/groups and then /healthcare disruptors with an S. Okay. So let's go to the panel now for the panel discussion. And let's clarify, first off, inflammation, the acute that can be helpful, and then the chronic, which is not so helpful, right? Can be harmful. Let's discuss the differences and what exactly is inflammation. When I think about it, I've always thought about that's where diseases kind of originate from, right? Is there something going on? It's kind of like that check engine light in your body that, hey, you better pay attention. You've got some inflammation in this area, but it can also be good too.
Yes. So inflammation in a nutshell is basically an immune response. The body sees or reacts to something that it doesn't like for whatever reason. And so to your point, acute inflammation can be a healing response. You've cut yourself. So immune cells come in, they want to fight off any bacteria to try to prevent the inflammation or disease from traveling elsewhere in the body if there's bacteria or some sort of pathogens. And then also to promote the healing process. Now, chronic inflammation, we do typically think of that more so when it comes to a disease. It could be heart disease, metabolic disorders, which could contribute to, high blood pressure, diabetes, different things of that nature. So when, to your point, the check engine light is not serviced, it's going to be much more than needing the oil changed or, checking your fluid levels. Right now, the engine is breaking down. Maybe there's issues with the carburetor or the struts are breaking down. So basically the network of things that support the body to help it work as best as it can, it's getting out of whack, and it stays that way.
Now you touched, and we will. Well, you kind of grabbed the bull by the horn. I guess that's because you're down there in Texas and you're wrestling. You consider Breck and I and Bob Longhorns, and just going to wrestle us to the ground today. And we are going to fire some questions at you in some other segments there. But you covered a lot of ground on that one. So let's step back. Like you said, inflammation, like a lot of things that happen, it can be good and it's necessary, right? You sprain your ankle, like you said, you cut yourself. And I would say even when you get a little cold, things are rushing at you, so you get that portion. But now you start to talk to, and you just kind of rapid fire them there a little bit on kind of the breakdown part. But let's talk a little bit more about the breakdown part of chronic inflammation. Some people will say it's the root. Bob said it's the root of all disease and cause. I say it's a heavy. Just as you talked, I think you mentioned it contributes. I think it's a heavy contributor. Mm-hmm. But not necessarily the cause, because certain things cause inflammation. but that chronic inflammation is what can really damage the veins of the body and the arteries of the body, lead to cardiovascular disease. It can start wearing down cartilage, so you get to the bone grinding disease. Can affect all the parts of the body. But how dangerous do you think chronic inflammation really is? Where do you fall on that spectrum, Freda, between it's the root, it's contributing, and if it's a contributor, how big a contributor really is it?
I think it's a very strong contributor. I hesitate to say it's the root cause, because if you think about it, acidity versus alkalinity in the body contribute to diseases, right? So if the body is in an alkaline state, and naturally a healthy body is ranging somewhere between 7.2 to 2.4 with the pH, then the body is much more likely to be healthy. Now, when the body is something below that range, that sets the body up for inflammation too. And the body will respond in an inflammatory way, trying to get back to this equilibrium that ranges from 7.2 to 7.4, depending on, the literature or just what somebody's natural body constitution is. So the inflammation is really a symptom of something else that needs to be addressed. So there again, it goes back to the whole check engine light.
Yeah. And some of those things that need to be addressed can be very, very serious things. They can be autoimmune diseases. It can be cardiovascular diseases. They can be arthritis. So it is a big indicator that something's going on in there. So how do we tell if we have inflammation? How do you like to approach it?
I look at every individual as, their own person. We're all very different, and it can manifest in different ways. So, for example, I have a good friend of mine who has asthma. She's been asking me some questions. Inflammation for her, it can be the wheezing, the difficulty breathing, sometimes some swelling in some places, some lethargy. But someone who has high blood pressure, they may have swollen ankles, lower extremity. So like calves on down to the feet could be swollen. They may have headaches. So it really depends on the person. And then once I kind of assess what's going on with the person and collect information about them, their habits and their lifestyle, then it gives me a better idea of what's really going on with them. If you have an autoimmune disease, to your point, a lot of times that starts with the gut, because that is our immune system, 70% of it.
It starts with what, Freda?
The gut.
The gut. I thought you said duck there for a while. I said, okay. what duck? The bile duck?
My little Texas twang.
Yeah. So can stiffness or soreness, can that also be an indicator?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, too, in the case of stiffness, sometimes that can also be a reflection of nutritional deficiencies as well. Mm-hmm. So there are certain trace minerals that contribute to the flexibility of muscles and just the tissues that support the muscles and the bone.
And then of course there are, so I liked you went through those kind of reflective things. And I forgot, like last time you were with us, you were talking to us about journaling and all this other stuff. So that is your introspective and monitor yourself type of approach, which I liked. And then there are also some measures that I think of over time that one can work with their physician and get done. I think people should be aware of, such as C-reactive protein, CRP test that one can take a look at, and that's a measure of general inflammation in the body. But then they have what's either also called highly sensitive or heart CRP, which really talk about how you're doing from a cardiovascular standpoint, your risk of heart disease there. And then there are a couple of others like the homocysteine levels, which isn't a direct measure, but if those are high, you've got some things going on. Homocysteine, if I remember correctly, that checking of that is usually a standard thing that people get on their checkup and they look at. But the C-reactive protein, whether it's the heart sensitive or the general one, they don't cost much, but you usually have to ask for them, and they may not be covered generally by insurance. And then there are things also that aside from that, like there's a sed rate test that measure how long it takes red blood cell vessels to drop down, and that'll give you indication of something. Then there's markers that look at what's going on in the liver from inflammation. So there's all those those could take, and I would recommend that people at least look at that the C-reactive protein, the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, the homocysteine, and then maybe even throw in the sed rate on that, and they can get a view of what's going on in their body and if they've got inflammation someplace and start working under look at that cause.
And Tim, are those standard tests that can be offered? Does our listeners go into their provider and ask for those specific measurements, those tests?
Yes. Like I said, I think, and I know homocysteine people, the doctors usually will get. I don't know. There's also mentioned ones around the liver. Another one, there's the interleukin test or something else. Those I don't think they're standard tests on the and maybe Freda's shaking her head, so no, those aren't standard tests, and neither are certainly not the sed rate or the C-reactive protein. But you can go in and ask for them, and they're not that expensive, and sometimes insurance will cover them.
Yeah, and those are blood tests. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
excellent.
And I'd like to just quickly add that C-reactive protein, they will order that in cases of a suspected heart attack, as you gentlemen may be aware. So, yeah. Well,
before we go to the next segment here and really kind of uncover some of the foods that people overlook that could be contributing and flaming the fire of inflammation, is there anything else we wanted to cover from the panel? Dr. Bob, did you have any comments, or anyone else that had any comment about inflammation before we move on? All right. Well, let's move on then to what are some of those?
Freda got all she had this out in the first 30 seconds of that. She wasn't going to let us get ahead, and she really just fired it right away.
She covered it all. It was great. So we could now move on to the next, because this is where people are really, really going to have some aha moments. I'm actually a little frightened about this next segment, Dr. Freda, because I know, well, only because I think I'm eating right things, but maybe I'm not. And do I really need to change some of the foods that I love and think are doing me good? But so, Dr. Freda, let's start with what to avoid. So what foods or even ingredients are powering those flames of inflammation?
Yeah, so I'll try not to be so aggressive and just give some general tips. So when it comes to inflammation, ideally, you want to avoid processed foods as much as possible. So by processed foods, these are foods that are essentially not in their natural state. They typically come in boxes or cans, some type of container. If it has a UPC code, it's likely processed to some degree. The reason why they are inflammatory is because it requires a lot more effort for the body to break these foods down. The body doesn't recognize the foods. In addition to the fact that oftentimes they don't have the enzymes that they may naturally have in their original state. Also, Tim.
You didn't go, and Freda and I meant to say Dr. Freda, then I'm glad you catch me there, Greg. I think we've come to be friends, and so she's sometimes allows me not to put that doctor in front of it, but I need our audience to realize who they're talking to, so I will try to stay with Dr. Freda here as much as I can. But Dr. Freda, they've been warning us about ultra processed foods. I mean, then you just said you wouldn't be so severe, and you just went to processed. So tell us, is it the ultra processed foods that we need to be aware of, or are you really saying you really should worry about we really shouldn't indulge in processed foods if you can? Ice cream's a processed food, come on.
Very much so. Yeah, unless you make your own. But so ultra processed foods are the most processed they are. So these are foods, if you read the ingredient label, there are going to be a lot of words you probably cannot pronounce, and you may not know what the foods are. So there's actually an app that people use. I don't remember what this one is called, but people use it to kind of figure that out. But the suggestion that I have is to keep it simple. So if it has words that you don't recognize, it probably is ultra processed. You've got these highly refined oils. Those typically are found in those ingredients. And even if you're looking at, let's say, protein bars, you think that you're eating more healthfully. But if you turn on the back of the label and you see that, they have hydrolyzed wheat protein, or, just some chemical term in front of what sounds like a food, it's probably ultra processed, even more energetically taxing and inflammatory to the body.
Yeah, I know when my daughter was really watching her diet to try to rule out some of the allergens that her newborn baby had, right? And that was so interesting to try to remove all of those things. And one of the things that they were concerned about was soy. Soy is in everything when you're not looking for it, you don't realize it, but it is in everything. You really have to read all the ingredients to rule out just that one element, right? Of soy oils or soy products of any kind.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, even if the label says that it doesn't have soy in the ingredients, that doesn't mean that the facility where the food was processed doesn't. And a lot of times, even if it says it's soy free, if you read the fine print below the ingredient list, you'll see made in a facility that also processes wheat, soy, and peanuts.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about these oils as to, because on one hand, I guess you don't call it, what's olive? Olive is really, is olive a fruit or a vegetable? So you got to is a stone, you got this little stone vegetable.
Fruit. It's a fruit. It has a seed.
Yeah. So it's a fruit. And you talk about extra virgin olive oil, and they say that's good for the heart. But now we hear some of these refined oils, and you talked oils a little bit, cause inflammation. So what are, simply for our audience, I guess we can't go through all 500 types of seed oil out there, but what are the common ones? What do you think are inflammatory ones? And what do you think are helpful ones or non-inflammatory ones, Dr. Freda?
Yeah, so in my opinion, the inflammatory ones would be like your soybean oil, a lot of the seed oils actually, in part too, because they go rancid quickly. Your canola oil, some people say that it's naturally occurring, that it was renamed and it's originally rapeseed. And then there are others who argue, the latter. So different things like that, palm oil, those things are going to be very inflammatory. Also, any oil, if it's old, it's going to be inflammatory. Because many of these oils really aren't intended to be kept for longer than like 12 to 14, maybe 16 months if you're lucky. And that's assuming that they're stored in the proper conditions. So otherwise, they will all become rancid over time. And it doesn't matter if you're using a high quality extra virgin olive oil. If you've stored it over your stove, then it's more likely to cause free radicals because it's rancid. So yes, extra virgin olive oil by definition should be, low for inflammation. Coconut oil, different things like that. I will say the caution with the olive oil, not all olive oils are created equally. And you may have heard that there are a lot of imposters out there. And so oftentimes, most of the olive oils you find on the market, they're actually not real olive oil. To the point where if you tasted the real olive oil, you would have a hard time. You might actually think that that's fake.
Wow, I didn't realize that. I'm going to have to check my Costco olive oil a little closer now.
So how can you spot the imposters, Dr. Freda?
It's very hard to tell. One of the key ways to know is the price point. A high quality olive oil is typically going to be a bit pricier for starters. This is one of the situations where oftentimes to be able to trust the consumer or to trust the manufacturer, if you're able to buy locally, like for example, in Arizona, there are some olive oil groves or olive groves, so if you're able to find a grower there, build a relationship with them and get to know their products, then you're much more likely to get a fresher press and something that will be pure.
Wow, good point. Well, like I found soy in everything when I was trying to help my daughter. The one thing that seems to be also added in just about everything is sugar, added sugar. And that's probably the nail in most of our coffins, right? Because we like the taste of sugar. It makes everything taste a little better. So beyond the weight gain, how is added sugar also adding to inflammation?
Yeah, so sugar increases inflammation because it actually overwhelms the body. We're not really designed to process so much sugar. And especially in America, we've been indoctrinated to be addicted to sugar. It actually is a major contributor to Alzheimer's. You may have heard of them referring to Alzheimer's as being diabetes type 3. Yeah, yep. So it can actually cause the formation of what we call advanced glycation products, where it's basically these, I'll just describe it as, what's a good way to describe it? It's almost like you have an artery or whatever, and now it's like a block. It's no longer flexible and smooth. So it essentially almost calcifies the body and destroys the integrity of whatever the tissue is. Yeah.
And so added sugar. So we just want to look for products that have their natural level of sugar in it and say no added sugar.
Well, so that can be a tricky thing because depending on the type of diet that you have, what your goals are, in some cases, even if it's naturally occurring. So, for example, lentils have a lot of natural carbs, and the body converts carbs to sugar too. Those are things to be mindful of, depending on what your goals are. Look for, ideally sugar-free. However, sugar-free doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. You want to try to limit various artificial sweeteners, like obviously aspartame. I think that's kind of a common knowledge now, but there are other issues. Erythritol has become very popular in recent years. However, erythritol is also consumed in large doses. It can be damaging to the body too. It can cause, upset stomach, nausea, diarrhea for some people.
Now, what about those so-called natural sweetness substitutes? Like for a while on one phase in my eating cycle, I heard about the agave syrup and substitute that for maple syrup. What's your feeling on things like agave syrup? Are they helpful? Are they truly helpful? Or did I do a good thing when I did that, Dr. Freda?
So I'm kind of biased because agave and I became great friends when I lived in Arizona. So some people say that agave is really no different than other sweeteners. But if you look at its historical use among the natives, it was really used for short bursts of energy. So there again, sugar of any form, really, it's not supposed to be, like just a mainstay of our diets, almost used sparingly. I would say that still agave can be better than some other products, depending on the glycemic load or how quickly it floods the body with sugar. Maple syrup, there's an argument about maple syrup. They originally, just maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe more, they've changed the grades. It used to be grade B maple syrup was supposed to be less inflammatory to the body, and depending on what someone was using it for, not spiking the blood sugar as much. But recently they did away with it, and now grade B is grade A. So it's kind of hard to know, apples from oranges in that case. So it's about moderation, listening to your body. Don't beat yourself up. As I think I mentioned in the previous episode, don't, set yourself up for success. If you're used to eating highly processed foods, okay, you recognize that you need to make a change. That's step one. But don't think that it's a good idea to just stop cold turkey and switch to all whole foods, especially when your palate isn't used to it, your body isn't used to it. So just, being mindful, like, okay, well, today I've only had, I don't know, a cup of agave. Hopefully it wouldn't be that much, but tomorrow let me strive to have maybe a half a cup and gradually taper.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we hit upon seed oils. We hit upon sugars, all of Dr. Bob's favorite stuff. Dr. Bob is kind of semi-traveling, so I really get to pick on Dr. Bob this week because it's tough for him to respond. You just got to sit there and take it. But now we'll get into another area that this one I don't know if it's Dr. Bob's or not, but meats. And let's talk specifically, go back to your processed meats, like even the deli meats, as opposed to red meats, because I'm hearing some thinking, right? That people have talked about red meat as an evil, but saying that the processed meats are even worse than red meats. So what's your view on that? And do you indulge in these meats, Freda? Dr. Freda?
No, I don't. But I will say, it's kind of like with the oils or like ultra processed foods. So the processed meats are kind of like the ultra processed version of the meat category, right? So oftentimes they have nitrates and other chemicals and ingredients in them that can promote inflammation and just be really hard on your digestion. And so if you were going to have the meat, it would be better, if possible, to have maybe just the steak itself, as opposed to something that came out of a package where you could not refrigerate it for a year and it would still be quote unquote fresh. Because if you have to put different things in something to stabilize it, imagine what that does when you put that in your body. That's the way I think of it.
So I'm wondering, this is Dr. Bob, I'm not on camera, but I just was wondering about somewhat processed meat, like different types of sausages that claim no nitrates added, no nitrates, no organic meat. I mean, organic meat are still bad news.
So did I miss a question in there?
I think Dr. Bob was saying you've got some sausages out there that say they're kind of good sausages, no nitrates, using natural things like celery and other things as part of the process. Are those?
And they use organic beef. I'm just wondering about what your thoughts are on those types of things, because a lot of people what they think are either sausages or whatever they're healthy, really healthy hot dogs that use organic meat, and they've got vegetable additives to it. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that are.
I think that they are a healthier choice than the others. But ideally, you want to try to be as whole and close to nature as possible. But yeah, I mean, if it's not going to have nitrates and some of the other things that they put in it to preserve the taste, the texture, the shelf life, the color, then yeah, that would still be a better choice. But everything in moderation.
I agree. Yeah.
Now, out of curiosity, I'm gonna throw something out of left. Well, I think you always say it's out of right field instead of left field. You ever looked at the recipes for I've ever made pemmican that like the Native Americans used to make? You ever look at that?
Just different, like traditional recipes.
Yeah, well, it's yes, because it's processed meat that could last them a year. The way they did it, but not. I think they had. I don't remember the whole process. I looked at one time, but I'm gonna hold that out to our expert here as something to look at and come back
Okay.
next time and say it's the pemmican and the way it's made and meant to preserve to be able to last throughout the year. Was that a natural thing, or were the Native Americans causing inflammation in their body by doing that? So that's it.
Some of them are historically long livers. I think they knew what they were doing, but I may be biased. I mean, the smokehouses where you could keep the meat and it would be preserved for a year or more. There was definitely something to that, and they didn't have laboratories where they would make ingredients that they would inject into the food, so it was still closer to nature.
Yeah, I think there'd be a more direct correlation between how much they walked each day or ran, more so than food was survival, not enjoyment like we unfortunately do now today. But you alluded to a healthy food that we might have some misconceptions about. Grabbing a power bar or some kind of a granola bar thinking that it's good for us. But there are some hidden foods like that we think are healthy and maybe they're actually pretty, not so healthy. Do you have some other examples or even other nutritious things like berries?
Yeah. So in general, those foods can be healthy. Raspberries was one that kind of came to mind. They are good. And yes, they can be inflammatory. But it's kind of shocking. It's not something to where like, oh my gosh, I'm having raspberries, I'm going to die. No, it's not like that. But depending on what your goals are. So if you're doing some kind of detox or cleanse, that might be something to kind of avoid for a bit until you're back to consuming more foods with a wide spectrum of ranging from alkalinity to acidity, because they are rather acidic when it comes to cleansing. And then I would say in the cases of granola bars, and protein bars, they are hidden sources of sugar in many cases, and sometimes they have hidden oil.
Where do blueberries fit on your list?
Blueberries are really great for alkalinity. Some people may struggle with the acidity of them in certain situations, but they overall are really wonderful and such a wonderful source of antioxidants.
Yeah.
But those raspberries, you got to keep an eye on them, huh?
Depending on your goals, I'll just put it that way.
All right.
Can you explain for our audience alkalinity versus acidity and why it is such a more valuable place to be than on the acid side of pH?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when I was talking about the body's ideal pH, that it's slightly alkaline. So 7.0 for the listeners out there is considered neutral. And if you go higher than that, then that's considered to be alkaline. So in this case, the body, it has lower inflammation. You're less likely to see diseases, and there are studies that show this. On the acidity side, you're below 7.0, and so you're much more likely to see inflammation.
So no, that range is that's an internal measure or a measure of some food.
And it's an internal measure. It's the blood pH usually.
So blood. Now, is there a saliva test for acidity in the body as well, or just you have to take a blood test on it?
There is a saliva test. I have seen it not recently, but there is a way to test that way. You can do like a litmus paper test. Mm-hmm. And so the paper will turn yellow if it's acidic. If it's green, it's alkaline.
Okay.
Yeah, just take a pull strip, put that in your mouth. You'll see if you even have chlorine in there too. So,
I'll tell you a story later, Breck, about why I got kicked out of the pool today by the staff, but about the chlorine test there. But now back to more important things. Still ahead, we've kind of talked about what to look at in terms of causes of inflammation in foods to be cautious of or avoid, or to eat in moderation. But Dr. Freda is going to take us into in a while. Now, what do you do to eat to calm inflammation, including when and how to get the most out of your meals on that. But before that, Breck, I think you've got something you want to share with us.
Yeah. So, Dr. Bob, I need to call you out again. Have you gotten your NeuroGum yet? This is an amazing product that is helping me. I have replaced energy drinks, which I know are not good for you. So I'm using NeuroGum, and with natural nootropics for energy and focus. It has natural caffeine, a bunch of vitamin B12 and B6, which is great for you, and the amino acid L-theanine, also known for improving cognitive function.
So, Breck, where can I buy that? Because I'm driving in the car and I'm ready to pull over and take a nap. So I'm wondering if there's a place I can go to.
You need this. I have it on special in the TikTok shop, so you can get it there, or you can also go to neurogum.com. But yeah, excellent, and no added sugar. In fact, it's no sugar in this. Tastes great, and so refresh your body and your mind with NeuroGum. And like I said, I'll leave the details in the show notes, and you can also find it in the TikTok shop.
Man, I'm more awake just having you talk about it. That's fantastic.
No, let's turn our focus back to good foods. We always want to know what your recommendation is. And for those who have not listened to any of the previous episodes with Dr. Freda, we had a great little backstory and learned more about her and what she is into. And then we learned how to even make foods taste better if we were trying to go a more organic route. So let's get into that now with what some of the good foods are and what foods can actually help you calm down inflammation.
All right. So the first one I want to move into is we still hear so much about the omega-3s in fish oil, and even a special type krill coming out of it. So what's your view on these omega-3s? Are they really wonderful for inflammation? And if so, why in terms of calming things?
Yeah, so omega-3s are good for inflammation in general. And so part of the reason why they're so important in our culture has to do with our diet. We consume far more omega-6 fatty acids or oils, which are generally, with one exception, inflammatory. And our bodies are supposed to have, in order to be in less of an inflammatory state, they're supposed to have a certain ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. However, we're consuming more of omega-6s. So that's part of the reason why the supplementation is encouraged. Not to mention the fact that it is the omega-3s help to support just natural reduction of inflammation in the body, depending on certain ways that the body works with various reactions.
And so how much do you think one should consume, and do I need to go to supplements to do it? Or if I eat my codfish once a week, is that have enough? Is it I need to eat salmon once a week, or what's enough, and what are the good sources for it?
Yeah, so in the case of supplementation, depending on the literature you read, it actually will say that to reduce inflammation and protect your heart and brain and all that good stuff, that you want actually about 6,000 milligrams of omega-3s daily for consumption. Now, that's not always feasible for people. And so getting it through
how much
food,
would I have to eat to get 6,000 milligrams of?
that would be quite a bit of salmon and actually sardines, cod. Those are, and mackerel. Those are some of the top omega-3 rich fishes. So you would need probably 3 to 4 servings a week, depending on where you are and what your goals are. Yeah. The part of the concern with fish right now, especially with pollution, has been, mercury and different things of that nature. So, making sure as much as possible that wherever your fish comes from, that it's a clean source, as clean as possible. If you have a supplement, trying to make sure that that supplement is purified and doesn't contain a lot of heavy metals. So those are some of the challenges with that.
Yeah. You hear a lot about also, spices. Turmeric is a really popular one right now. And if you are getting enough of the good things in your, seasonings, do you need a supplement? At what point do you say, okay, I'm seasoning this with turmeric, or I'm using I use a lot of cinnamon because of its, value and anti-inflammatory value and properties, but you also need a supplement including some of your seasonings and spices as well?
So I would say that also depends, because not everyone's diet is the same. Cinnamon, I'll start with that. There are 2 different types of Saigon cinnamon and Ceylon cinnamon. They're not necessarily created equal. Now they're saying that both have anti-diabetic and anti-inflammatory effects, but that wasn't always originally the case. And, for example, if someone has diabetes and they're taking a certain diabetes drug, cinnamon actually mimics that effect. So that's something that's important to know. If they're supplementing with cinnamon, they might overdo it and potentially have, their blood sugar might drop too low. In the case of turmeric, turmeric doesn't stay in the body for long, which is part of the reason why you'll see turmeric supplemented with pepper or a pepper extract, piperine, I think it's pronounced like that. And so that's also something to be aware of. So it's to understand that, yes, incorporating these foods are great, but don't rely on heavy dosing. I would imagine the food would taste quite terrible if you were to try to get the amount that you needed. Just try to eat, as I mentioned before in a previous podcast, from the colors of the rainbow, and give yourself grace and try to eat as healthfully as possible, and then start looking at the small changes that you can make to tweak.
Now, so you, in that small changes and other areas you've talked about goals earlier. So it all seems to point towards, one of the things we said we were going to be a little different here. And I think it is you're in generally sweeping rules. You're talking about personalization is how I would characterize that. So how do people go about really personalizing their needs and their diet?
Yeah. So part of it starts with knowing yourself. As you pointed out earlier, I had mentioned journaling, but being aware of what you like and what's doable for you, knowing yourself and your habits and your practices. And from there, you can start to figure out what are the directions you should take. Sometimes it may require, connecting with the right healthcare professionals and making sure that these are people who not only have your best needs or best interests at heart, but also understand your preferences to help you design a customized plan and set you up for success.
So, you covered the rainbow, right, of foods in there. Give us examples, talk about, what would be good alternatives, because, I don't know if orange is in the rainbow, but, Cheetos have an orange hue to them. That's probably not what you're talking about, right? So give us some examples.
So colors of the rainbow. So yellows, for example. So your squashes. Yes, turmeric is anti-inflammatory. It could be something a little orange in there. So it could be carrots. It could be sweet potatoes. So these are whole foods. These are, vegetables, because in general, we don't have a problem with meat consumption and getting the protein, but it's the other things that we don't typically think about. We have to work a little harder on. Obviously your greens, there are so many different options. And if you get bored with the greens that you see at your usual grocery store, go to an international market, go to an Asian market. You're going to find such a larger just collection and selection of different types of produce, different colors, different types of spinach, like so many more than what we typically have in the United States. And just try to be mindful of that. And, don't beat yourself up, give yourself grace, and celebrate your successes.
Yeah. What about nuts and seeds? Not all nuts are equal. And so we want to talk about that. Which ones are good? Which ones maybe to be a little more sparingly on? If you are, like me, I like to snack on almonds is kind of my go-to.
So nuts, there are debates about it. So ideally you want your nuts to be activated, meaning like soaked for a certain amount of time to remove these chemicals that are on the nuts and seeds that reduce the absorption of nutrients. So we call that process activated. And they might be used for other products, maybe your nut milks or whatever. You would typically soak them beforehand as opposed to just going straight in and consuming them. When you talk about inflammation, cashews sometimes can be a factor. People who are allergic to poison ivy may not do too well with cashews.
Well, are they related? Are cashews related to poison ivy?
There's a related chemical, yeah. So that could be an issue for them. Also, there is a challenge with consuming too many nuts and seeds because that could also promote inflammation. It's like everything else. You need enough, but not too much. Everything in moderation. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And then also concerns with molds, making sure that the nuts and seeds are fresh. So peanuts, which technically are a legume, but for the sake of this discussion, those are to be considered because they're prone to aflatoxins. There can be issues at times with pistachios also.
Yeah. And I obviously, when someone is snacking on a snack food that's a nut, usually there's a bunch of added salt and things like that you need to be aware of. I tend to grab the baker's kind that don't have any added salt, but are those still? So my big bag of unsalted almonds, I still need to soak before I consume them?
Well, the distinction is if they are raw. If they've already been roasted, then, it's really a done deal. I will say this too. I have noticed that many of the nuts and seeds that previously were considered raw, now they are coming with different oils on them. I'm not really sure what that's about, but I've noticed if I want to grab, one of these snack bags that you're talking about now, if I look on the back, it's not just, the nuts and salt, it's the nuts and cottonseed oil and palm seed oil and canola. So I don't know if that's part of preserving it or whatnot, but I've just noticed it in the past maybe 6 months or so.
Is that good or bad in your opinion?
I don't know the rationale, but me personally, it defeats my goals because I want to do other things with my nuts and my seeds. So it's bad for me because I can't make some of the things that I'd like to make.
Okay. And then speaking of making things, and then Breck, Breck will eat those snacks for breakfast. He'll eat them for bedtime. Now, and so related to that, and when I take my supplements, I'm now finding I recommend if I take my UC Undenatured Collagen 2, it says take it in the morning before I eat and at least 30 minutes before I eat. If it says but Boswellia, it'll say take my Boswellia 30 minutes to an hour before I go to work out. So when you look at these foods, eating the rainbow, eating these nuts, eating the spices, do you think timing plays a role in this?
What time of day
time of day? Should I wake up and have collard greens in the morning and eat almonds before I go to bed? What is it?
Yeah. So when you're eating for optimal absorption and to reduce inflammation, you're breaking your fast with your first meal. And so oftentimes what I recommend is that you eat lightly or you consume something alkaline in the morning. lemon water, lime water, something green, because that will be alkalizing to the body. Lemons, yes, are acidic, but once you consume them, they become alkaline inside the body. Having nuts first thing in the morning, you might be one of those people where you have a very strong stomach. So if that works for you, go for it. But if you're a person with a sensitive stomach and you want to get the most out of, your digestion, you kind of want to ease into that. So unless they're maybe blended up in something or in some kind of a pate, maybe waiting until a little later in the day to have the nuts and opting for fruit.
Yeah. Good.
So this is a very, very complicated subject, and you're doing a great job, Dr. Freda, because like you said, everybody's different. We have different histories, different backgrounds, different stress levels, different family environments, different dietary patterns. It's really wild out there to even try and tackle this subject. So I give you credit.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Because every time we ask you a question, you have to say, "Well, it depends." I get it. I understand that. It's really a wild topic. What I'm wondering about are a couple questions. One are, some people are allergic to green peppers, but not red or yellow peppers. And other, they're allergic to like one food stuff, but not another related one. Do you have any idea what's going on there? I don't understand how the body does that.
In some cases, it can be a genetic mutation. So I think one of the most famous examples probably is the whole cilantro bit, where for some people it tastes like soap and others love it. And it boils down to a gene that causes the people who can't stand it to think that it has a soapy taste. I'm glad I don't have that problem. I would hate that.
Yeah.
It's the same reason why some people, respond to certain painkillers, but not others. One person can take this and another person, it makes them dry heat. So our bodies metabolize things differently. We have different sensitivities. Also, it depends on the state of the body. Our bodies evolve and change over time. There may be certain foods you didn't like at a certain point in your life, and maybe now you like them. Brussels sprouts. I know many people who didn't like Brussels sprouts as children, and as adults, for some reason, they think they're the best thing since sliced bread. But also our bodies know what we need, so sometimes we will gravitate towards something because we need something that's in it. Maybe there's something going on with your liver, and because of certain compounds that are in those Brussels sprouts, you're gravitating towards that because your body knows instinctively what it needs.
That's interesting because I've treated a lot of different clients and a mixture of men and women. And it's the women who talk like you, who understand, feel things, know, their body gravitates towards things. It's the men that I've come across for the most part are not that good at it. It's almost like the men are stones, where it's like, how do you feel about that? Well, it feels fine. I don't know. Do you have that experience with the men who you run into, or am I just dreaming?
Well, I don't want to make generalizations. I'm kind of outnumbered here, except for Cheryl there. But I do find, men, they like things a certain way, especially if they've been doing it for a long time. So you have to be a bit of a politician and get their buy-in.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, because we're running short on time here, give us and our listeners some suggestions of some good snacks to go to, or even meals that you would recommend.
Mm-hmm. So as far as snacks, I'm a big fan of your nuts option. If you also, pieces of fruit, and also trying to prepare things beforehand. So that way you're less likely to grab, that highly processed bar or bag of chips. Also try making your own version. So you could easily make your own potato chips. Try it with, like oven frying or preparing it that way. So, a peanut butter or maybe a sunflower seed butter and carrots or celery, those make great snacks. Having some apples, putting together your own granola. They store well and they're easy go-to things and they travel well.
Okay. Appreciate that. That's excellent suggestion. So as we wrap up here in closing, what are some misconceptions about, anti-inflammatory eating that really frustrate you that people, our listeners, need to know about?
I think for me, it's the assumption that if you go from ultra processed to processed, then you shouldn't have inflammation. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who really think that. And I'm not sure why. Because at the end of the day, I mean, really eating is a bit of an inflammatory process. There's a reason why there's the data that shows what happens to the body when we've been fasting for a while, you know? So really anything that you put in your body's going to respond to it. And your immune system is always doing its job to, you know, it's surveillance. What is here that shouldn't be.
Yeah. So don't just stop at processes. You want to get back to nature, is Dr. Freda's advice there. Now, what about if someone feels so overwhelmed by that, saying, "Boy, Dr. Freda wants to get me all processed food, and I just can't handle all that." What would you do to start it? What's something easy that people can do to start if they're way out on the spectrum of inflammatory eating?
I would start with maybe replacing one item, not even a meal, just one item. And see if you can make that item yourself. Mm-hmm. You know, in the case of Cheetos, to your earlier point, that might be a little bit harder to do. But one thing I have found that is really helpful and a huge eye opener for people is when they try making something that they would typically buy and they see how much better it tastes when it's homemade.
Yeah, good point. Well, you know, Dr. Freda, we're all cousins here, but we do have unique DNA. So how does someone personalize their anti-inflammatory diet, and how would they know what's working best for them?
Mm-hmm. So personalizing it, typically you would have to have some testing done. There's a lot going on now with people testing for personalized food. There's even a restaurant, I forget where it is, but it basically, you have a meal that's based around your food profile. So that's one element. Also being tested for allergens is very important. And then once you know what you're allergic to, once you know what, you know, is something that is likely a trigger for you, based on your genetic profile, you can actually start to design your diet that way, and working with obviously the qualified healthcare professionals who can help you do that. Mm-hmm. And also a lot of it is intuitive. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to go see a specialist in order to have an inflammatory diet that's personalized. Listen to your body. You know, I figured out that I was gluten intolerant because I noticed that my hands and feet would swell after I had pita bread. And then I confirmed it through testing. So that's a big part of it. You are really your biggest doctor.
Yeah. Related to that, and I think that's a good point. You may say the same thing there. You're one's own biggest doctor there. But if someone is struggling with that, you know, we talked about some of the observational things: pain, puffiness, fatigue. You talked about swelling your hands or suffering from that, and they don't know whether or not food can help with that. How would you advise them? What would you say?
Well, I would advise them to pay attention to how they feel after they eat a meal, after they eat every meal. There again, I sound like a broken record, but the journaling is really helpful, especially if people are having trouble identifying patterns. It also makes you more aware. And then once you start to notice that, then you can slowly start to do what they call an elimination diet. We kind of have a pharmacy version of that too with drugs if we don't know what's causing the reaction, where you remove one item at a time to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, how do people contact you if they need some help?
Sure. So I can be reached at Dr. Freda Wiley at fredawiley.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. And, you know, I'm in the Facebook group. So.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. That's great. I appreciate you. And thank you so much, Dr. Freda, for being here today and being a part of the WellWaveNOW show. It's always great to have you on. You have so much knowledge to share with our listeners, and I learn something every time I chat with you as well. So thanks again. And thanks for reminding us that that eating really can shape the way that you feel, the way that you heal, and even function. helping us to better understand which foods are inflammatory and which ones can actually help, and helping us to, learn that and take the right steps bite by bite. So one bite at a time. So thanks again, for Dr. Freda. It's great to have you on, and we welcome you back again at another time. And for all of our listeners that have joined us today, thank you for joining the WellWaveNOW podcast. And until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, wellness, it's in you.